Good morning all. Welcome to our course on C programming language. In today's session, I am planning to discuss a concept on the command line arguments. We know the meaning of an argument. So, the other name for the arguments is parameters. While discussing the concept of functions, these arguments are parameters. They provide the input to a function. So, whatever values you want to input to a function, you will be passing them to the function with the help of these arguments. So, we have seen various functions where you can pass the arguments, that means a function which accepts arguments. But there is a special function in the C programming language, as we all know that it is the main function. The purpose of the main function is, it is very important function, and the purpose is the total execution of the program starts from this function. But while you look at the syntax of the main function for the programs what we have written till date, the main function has a return type which is integer. This is the return type, but there are no arguments for the main function. But whenever you are discussing about the concept of command line arguments, the main function is called by the operating system with some arguments. So, the implementation of the command line arguments requires the input to the main function in the form of arguments. So, when you call the main function, you will be giving some inputs to the main function in the form of arguments and with the help of the command prompt CMD, we call it as CMD. So, this is all about the introduction to the command line arguments. So, the command line arguments are nothing but the inputs that we pass to the main function while you are executing the program in the command prompt. So, this is the definition. Once again I am repeating, the command line arguments are the inputs that we provide to the main function while you are executing the program with the help of the command prompt. Right. So, how many arguments can a main function accept? This is one question you can ask. The main function can accept 2 arguments. The first argument we call it as argc, and the second argument is called as argv. Argc represents the argument count. So, argc is something like an acronym that is found with these 2 words, that is argument count. Similarly, argv represents, or it is called as the argument vector. These are the only 2 arguments that are being inputted to the main function. The first argument is argument count and the second argument is called as argument vector. This argument count, what is the use of this argument count is, this argument count keeps track of how many inputs you are passing to the main function via the command prompt. So, it gives the count of arguments. It is just an integer value. But when you come to the argument vector, this argument vector is nothing but an array of strings. Therefore, the data type of this particular argument vector will be char star, that is, it is pointer to character. So, a pointer to character is nothing but a string, but we are not going to store a single string in this argument vector. We are having more number of strings. So, in order to store those more number of strings, we will declare this argument vector as an array. This is all about the arguments that we are going to pass to the main function. So, we have two arguments, argument count and argument vector. With this basic idea in our mind, let us discuss some more important points regarding to this command line arguments. This is the introduction part. As we know that the main function is the most important function of C, we have discussed this point, and we have discussed that the main function is defined with a return type of int and without parameters. This is our normal practice. We do not put any arguments inside this main function. But whenever you want to go for the concept of command line arguments in C, you need to pass some arguments to the main function from the command line. So, command line arguments are given after the name of the program in the command line shell or command prompt, whatever it may be, and this command prompt belongs to the operating system. So, you open the command prompt and then you try to execute the C program, or when you try to run the C program via the command prompt, it is mandatory that you should give the inputs to the function, the main function, and those inputs that we give to the main function are called as the command line arguments. So, to pass command line arguments, we define the main function with two arguments. This one we have discussed. The first argument, it gives the number of command line arguments, which is called as the argument count, and the second parameter is the list of command line arguments. So, whatever values that you pass via the command line, everything will be stored in the form of strings. In order to store the values of the arguments that are passed by the user via this command line, we are making use of a character pointer, which is nothing but a string, and you can see here that we are declaring this argument vector as an array. We are not specifying any size. Why? Because the program may accept one parameter, or it may not accept any parameters, or it may accept 2, 3, 4 and so on. So, we are declaring an array that can hold any number of strings or any number of values. And the first parameter, as we have discussed, that it is argument count, which gives the number of inputs that you have given along with the program name. And since we are just giving the count, the data type of that particular variable argc will be integer data. So, this is the main syntax that we are going to use for the command line arguments, very important. And remember that the first argument is always the argument count only, and the second parameter will be the argument vector only. You should not interchange these values, or you should not interchange these parameters. The first parameter cannot be a string or the argument vector, and the second parameter you cannot place it as argument C. The syntax is very, very important. And after this basic idea, let me discuss some more points regarding this argument count and argument vector. The argument counts data type is an integer, and it stores the number of command line arguments passed by the user, including the name of the program. So, while you are running the C program with the command prompt, it is mandatory that you should specify the name of the program as the first parameter, and after that you have to give the values to the main function. Let me take an example. For example, I have written a command line program, and let me name it the particular function as add.c, and this command line program, it accepts two integer values and outputs the result of the sum of those two integer values. This add.c is my program name, and while you have the command line argument like this, our command prompt is there. This is our command prompt screen, and here when you want to execute the C program, you need to give the first parameter or the first argument as the name of the program, whatever name it may be. It is add I have taken here, it may be XYZ or whatever name you want to give to the C program, it is your choice. The first command or the first argument will be the name of the program, and we know the purpose of this add.c. It accepts two integer values and it outputs the sum. After this name of the function or name of the program, you have to leave one white space and then you have to give the first argument. Let me give the first value as 10, and after this you leave one white space and then you have to give the second argument. You can observe here that in total in the command prompt I have given 3 arguments. The first one is the name of the program, the second one is the first value, and the third one is the second value which I want to add. While this argument C is considered, it counts all the values that are given in the command prompt. So, all the parameters will be counted. So, we actually require these 2 values, that is it, 10 and 20 is enough, but in the command prompt we need to give the first parameter or the first argument as the name of the program. Therefore, this is also counted as one argument. Totally we have 2 plus 1, that is 3 arguments are there. Let me take another example where I have a function that accepts 3 integer values and gives the result or gives the sum of those 3 integer values. So, I know that the name of the program is one parameter or one argument, and after that I need to give 3 values 10, 20, 30, and they should be separated with space. So, how you are going to give the inputs in the command line is also very important. Every parameter or every argument should be separated with a white space. So, totally at this particular instance I have 4 parameters or 4 arguments that are given in the command line. Therefore, the argument count value will be equal to 4. This is very important. So, you should always consider the name of the program as one extra argument that you are passing to the command line. Right. So, example I have given it, no need to explain this particular one. And one important point is the argument count can never be non-negative. Why? Because let me take a simple example where the program does not accept any parameters, but in order to execute the program using command line, you have to give the name of the program like this. Though you do not have any parameters that accepts from the user to make some calculations, one parameter is mandatory, that is the name of the program. Therefore, the argument count will be at least 1 in all the cases, even the function accepts any inputs or not. This is very important. That is the reason why the author is saying that argument count cannot be negative. It is always a non-negative value. And coming to the argument vector, I told that this is an array of character pointers. So, it is a character pointer and then we are declaring it as an array. So, it is nothing but a array of strings. So, it is capable of storing all the strings. What strings it is going to store means, let me take the same example 1 what I have discussed here. In this particular example, it is going to take 2 values from the user from the command line, and while you are executing this command line programs, I told that the program name should be given as the mandatory argument and it should be the first argument. So, this particular add, the name of the program will be stored inside this argument vector. Similarly, the second value what is given by the user, this is also stored inside the argument vector, and 20 is also stored in the argument vector. So, whatever you are going to give in the command line, everything will be stored inside the argument vector, and remember that everything will be stored inside the argument vector in the form of strings. This is very important point. We know that the name of the program is always a string, but if you consider this 10 and 20, you are going to consider this 10 and 20 as the integer values. But since you have given this 10 and 20 as the arguments to the command line, these 10 and 20 they are also treated as strings, they are not treated as integer values. So, important point is whatever you give in the command line argument, everything will be treated as strings irrespective of their original data type. Even if you give a floating point value, it will be treated as a string. Similarly, if you give an integer, that is also treated as a string. Right. So, that is the very important point. You should keep it in mind that whatever we give in the command line, everything will be stored in the argument vector and everything will be stored in the form of strings. But how can you convert or how can you add a string of 10 with a string of 20? This will not happen. You cannot make use of the addition operator, that is plus symbol cannot be included between these strings. So, what you have to do is you have to convert this string while you are operating or while you are making some manipulations. You have to convert those strings into numbers or into integers or into floating point numbers, whatever it may be. Similarly, this 20 has to be converted from string to number or integer. See here, in the last session and the previous session, we have discussed a concept on typecasting, where you are going to convert one data type into another data type. The same concept we will be applying here, but with the help of some predefined functions. We are not going to use the casting operator. We know the casting operator is a data type that is placed in between these parentheses. This is called as cast operator. We are not going to use the cast operator to perform the typecasting in the concept of command line arguments. Here you can observe that you are converting a string to integer. Therefore, you are converting one data type into another data type. So, it is almost equal to a typecasting, but remember that here we are not going to use the cast operator, but we are going to use some predefined functions, which we will be discussing right now. Some predefined functions are used to convert the strings into integer or floating point numbers. We will be coming to that particular slide in a short while. So, that is all about the argument vector, and he is giving some more examples that if argc is greater than 0, that means argument count is greater than 0, the array elements from argument vector 0 to argument vector argc minus 1 will contain pointers to strings. What does it mean? I told that whatever you give on the command line, they will be treated as strings and everything will be stored inside argument vector. When I say a vector, it is an array. When I say an array, it consists of the index number starting from 0 to n minus 1. This we know very well. But here n is nothing but, it is nothing but the argument count. Therefore, the index number always starts with 0 and ends with argument count minus 1. So, I have different cells to store the strings. and the index always starts with 0 and ends with and so on, argument count minus 1. So, the last index number, the highest index number will be argument count minus 1. Now, look at the mapping we have in the array from the command line. In this example, I have the program name as the first parameter or the first argument. Therefore, this particular add, the name of the program is always stored in argument vector of 0. That means, the program name is stored in the index 0 like this. And the second parameter what is given in the command line will be stored in the next index, that is 1. Therefore, 10 is stored here. Similarly, if you take this particular third parameter that is given as input in the command line, that is 20, this will be stored in the next index, that is index number 2. Therefore, 20 will be stored in this one. And as I told that the last index is always argument count minus 1. So, in this particular example, the argument count will be 1, 2 and 3. Therefore, the highest index will be argument count minus 1, that is 2. See here, this one. So, this entire thing we call it as argument vector. So, argument vector of 0 is nothing but name of the program, and from argument vector of 1 and so on up to argument vector of argc minus 1, all these things they are the inputs to the function. So, from argument vector 1 to argument vector of argument count minus 1, everything we will be treating it as the inputs to the function, except the argument vector 0 where it stores the name of the program. And remember, very important point, this add and 10 and 20, everything is treated as a string, right. And this one we have discussed. Argument vector of 0 is the name of the program, and after that till argument vector of argument count minus 1, every element is a command line argument and everything is a string. This is very important. So, we have got some idea on this argument count and argument vector. Let us discuss some of the properties of the command line arguments. All these properties are whatever we have discussed till now. So, the command line arguments are passed to the main function, we know this very well, and the command line arguments are the parameters or arguments that are supplied to the program when it is invoked. We have seen the concept of invoking a function. While discussing the concept of functions, I told that by default the functions will be inactive in nature. So, whenever you want to make it active, you have to invoke that function. Whenever you want to invoke a function, you want to call that particular function. So, when you call a function, it is invoked. Therefore, whenever you want to invoke a main function, the main function will be always called by the operating system. In short form, we will call it as OS. So, you may have a doubt that who is going to invoke the main function? The operating system is going to invoke the main function, that is it. And why we make use of these command line arguments means, these command line arguments are used to control the program from outside instead of hard coding, right. Hard coding in the sense, we are not going to take two variables with 10 and 20 and we are not going to make use of this particular formula a plus b. So, this type of programming is called as hard coded program. That means, we are going to give the values or we are going to initialize the variables with some default values. What happens to this program is, you want to, when you execute this program for one time, it will give the result as 30, second time 30, third time 30. So, how many times you execute, n number of times, the result will always be 30. So, such type of hard coded programs are not expected from the programmers. The programmers have to write some interactive programs. The program has to interact with the programmer, and it should take some dynamic values from the user and it should operate, right. So, for that particular concept or to write the interactive programs, we need to make use of these command line arguments. Of course, you may have a doubt that without these command line arguments can't we write the interactive programs. We can always write the interactive programs using C programming by making use of the scanf and printf functions. So, printf, we know all these concepts, right. The other way to write the interactive programs is by making use of the command line arguments. So, never ever try to write the hard coded programs. This is not expected from a programmer. So, interactive programs can be written in two ways. One is by making use of the command line arguments, and the other one is by making use of the scanf functions and scanf and printf. And all these things we know. Argument vector of argument count is a null pointer. Let me explain this, right. So, in the previous example, my argument count is 3. And argument vector always have the indices starting from 0 to argument count minus 1. So, for this argument vector, the index always starts with 0 and ends with argument count minus 1. So, it always ends with 2. But when you try to give a value like this, here you can see that the maximum value of this index of this argument vector is 2. But when you try to give this equation, then you are getting something like this, argument vector of 3. You are going beyond the limits of the argument vector or the array. So, you may get a null pointer or you may get some undefined value. Why I am saying this? You will get a null pointer means we know that when you are dealing with the strings, the last value will be automatically inserted as \0, which is called as null pointer. Therefore, here we will get it as \. And similarly, this point we have already discussed that the argument vector of 0 holds the name of the program, and argument vector of 1 points to the first command line argument, and so on, and up to argument vector of n points to the last argument. This n is nothing but argc minus 1, that is it, right. And after these properties, how we are going to input the values using the command line arguments, right. In the previous example also I have told that I have a program called add and I need to input two values. Every parameter or every argument that you give in the command line arguments should be separated by spaces. This is how you are going to give. For example, if I want to make use of 3 arguments, so I write the name of the program space first parameter space second argument space third argument. The point you have to understand here is why you are giving inputs to the command line arguments, you have to give spaces, white spaces between those arguments, that is it. But you may have a doubt that what is the way we need to follow when the input itself is having the spaces. For example, I have a string like this, computer science, or I want to give the string like computer science and engineering. This is my string. So, in this particular string you have some white spaces. The method you have to follow when you have inputs or when you have the arguments consisting of white spaces means you have to enclose those entire string or values with double quotes or single quotes, anything is possible. If you don't have any white spaces in the input itself, just leave one white space and then you give the arguments in the command line arguments. But when you have white spaces in the input itself, you have to enclose that particular string with double quotes or single quotes. This is the way how we are going to give inputs to the command line arguments, right. Now, let us see one particular example. Let me complete this one, right. So, the next topic what we are going to discuss under this command line arguments is C typecasting functions. I told that the argument vector is a array of characters or is an array of character pointers, which is nothing but strings. Whatever you give in the command line argument, everything will be stored in the argument vector in the form of strings. But when I want to make some operations, arithmetic operations on the command line arguments, which is stored in the argument vector in the form of strings, you need to convert these strings into integer values or float. So, you need to convert the data type string into int or float. This is nothing but typecasting. To support this type of conversion of strings to integer or conversion of strings to float, C supports some predefined functions like this. So, these are the inbuilt typecasting functions that are available in the C language, which performs the data type conversion from one type to another. The first one is A to F. You can read it as A to F, right. This is one function. You can call it as atof function, or in order to clearly call it as, you can call it as A to F. A stands for string and F stands for float. So, you are going to convert the string to float, and there exists another function called as atoi, or you can call it as A to I. A is string and I is int. So, this function converts the string to integer, and the third function is atol or A to L. So, A is nothing but string and L is a long int. This function, this predefined function converts the strings to long integer. The reverse functions are also there. So, here I to A, that means you are going to convert the integer to string. Similarly, L to A, you are going to convert the long int to string. These are the various predefined functions or typecast functions that are available in C for converting the strings into some floating point values or integers or long integers. So, by this we can understand that what is the advantage of command line arguments and what are the different concepts that are related to these command line arguments. So, this is the end of today's topic, that is the command line arguments, but before winding up the session, let me explain this with a programming example. Here I want to make use of I want to write a command line program which accepts 3 integer values and prints the sum of those integer values. As we all know that we always start the programming in the C programming language with these preprocessor directives #include stdio.h, and you are going to add 3 integers and give the result or the sum of those 3 integers as the output, right. For that we told that we need to convert the strings that are given in the command line arguments into integers or floating point numbers, whatever it may be, and that is done by making use of the predefined functions like A to I, A to F, something like, right. and all these a to I function and a to L function, a to F function, all these predefined functions that are used to convert the strings into integer, float and long. These are defined inside a header file. Since they are predefined functions, they should be defined in some header files, right. So, they are defined inside the header file, which is called as standard library, which is defined as stdlib.h. And I start my main function, and since you are writing the command line program, remember that you should give two arguments to the main function. One is of type int and the name is argument count argc, and the second one is char star, pointer to a character, and you are going to mention it as argv, which is argument vector, and you are going to specify it as an array. And let me take two values. The program for addition of 3 integers and print the sum of those 3 integer values remains the same as if you are writing the normal C program. Everything you have to write, but remember that you are not going to use the scanf function in the command line arguments. You never use the scanf function. We know that the scanf is a predefined function which is used to read the values from the user, but here you are going to read the values from the user itself, but that is done via the command line arguments. Therefore, you are not going to use the scanf. Scanf is not at all useful in writing the command line arguments, but all the remaining things will be same. So, in order to add 3 integers and print the sum of those 3 integers, let me take 3 integer variables along with one more variable which is called as sum. Let me initialize the sum to 0. If you do not initialize it, nothing will happen, but it is a normal practice that whenever you want to find the sum or product or whatever it may be, initially you will initialize it to 0 or 1 according to your requirement, right. So, after this, in a normal program, you will be reading the values or you will be interacting, the program will be interacting with the user with the help of the scanf and printf functions. But here I am not going to make use of the scanf function. Why? Because the inputs we are taking it in from the command line arguments. Whatever value that is taken from the command line, you are going to store it in the a value. The first value is going to store, and this a is an integer variable. Therefore, you have to store the integer value only, but you are taking the first argument from argument vector of 1. Why? Because argument vector of 0 will be the name of the program. So, we are not bothered about how we can make use of the program name, but the first parameter for the calculation of sum will be stored inside this argument vector of 1. But what happened here? This argument vector of 1 is a string. So, you need to convert it into an integer. For conversion of string to integer, we have a predefined function called atoi. So, this is how you need to convert. So, the first argument which is stored in argument vector of 1 is given as input to atoi function. Therefore, the string will be converted to integer and that value will be stored inside this a. This particular code we will execute it for all the things atoi. So, for b we are going to store the second argument. So, argument vector of 2 should be there, and the last one is atoi of argument vector of 3, like this. Now, what we will do? We will add this. So, whatever values we have converted it from the strings and we are storing it in the variables, respective variables. Now, I call the sum function, I calculate the sum function as a plus b plus c. I want to print the value of sum. So, you can make use of the printf function, sum of sum is equal to percentile d. Why we are using this format specifier percentile d means it is a corresponding format specifier to deal with the integer values, and now I put the variable as sum, that is it. So, before the execution here in this online compiler is something different, but when you go to the command line you need to follow some sequence of steps, but here in the bottom line you can see here that we have the command line arguments, you can give the input here. I give 10 space 20 space 30 as my input values. I am not going to give the name of the program here. Why? Because the name of the program is automatically taken by the compiler in the online compilers, but while you are executing in the command prompt, it is mandatory that you have to specify the name of the program as the first argument, and this becomes the second argument, and this becomes third argument, this becomes fourth argument. But internally it will be converted into the first argument will be the name of the program, second argument will be 10, third argument will be 20, and fourth argument will be 30. So, this 10 which is stored in argument vector 1, you can see here in the form of strings is converted to integer and is stored in A. Similarly, 20 is stored in argument vector of 2 and it is converted to integer with the help of this atoi function and is stored inside this B variable. The 30 which is given as the last argument, it is stored inside argument vector of 3 and it is converted to integer with the help of atoi function and it is stored inside this C. Now, we have A, B, C, all that is stored as integers. So, A is having 10 integer, B is having an integer value of 20 and C is having the integer value of 30. So, sum is equal to A plus B plus C and I am printing it, simple program. Let me run this program. See here, I am getting the sum as 60. So, 10 plus 20 plus 30 is 60, I got the result, right. For example, if you are interested to print the name of the program also, I can write it like this. Printf new line, name of the program is percentile. Here we are printing the name of the program which is nothing but a string, therefore, we have to use the format specifier as percentile s, and we know that it is going to store the name of the program in argument vector of 0, 0th index. Let me run this. See here, sum is 60 and the name of the program is ./a.out. So, the name of the program is a.out. So, a.out is a special program which is used in the Linux operating system to print the output or to see the outputs from the C programming language, right. And if I want to know what is the value of the first argument, the first argument is stored in argument vector of 1. Let me print the value \n, the value of first argument is percentile. You may be in a wrong assumption that 10 is an integer, therefore, we need to make use of percentile d as the format specifier, but I told that the 10 will be converted and is stored inside this argument vector of 1 in the form of strings. Therefore, here you have to use the concept of percentile s only, argv of 1. Let me execute it. See here, the value of first argument is 10, but let me check it out what happens if I give the format specifier as percentile d. So, this is our wrong assumption that we are giving a value of 10, it is an integer. So, the format specifier should be percentile d. Even though you have given the integer value of 10, it is stored in argument vector of 1 as string. Therefore, this is a incompatible format specifier. Let me check it out what is the output here. See here, the value of first argument is something you got 56328565, and you can see the program is executed with a warning. What is the warning? Format %d expects argument of type int, but argument 2 has type char star, which is nothing but a character pointer. Therefore, instead of %d you have to give the %s. So, even though you do not specify this type of correct format specifiers, it is not going to stop the execution of the program. It is going to execute it, but you are getting some wrong results. See. So, this is how we are going to execute the programs in the command line prompt or command line arguments. So, you can write some programs related to these command line arguments, and you can execute and you can check it out the results, right. But remember that you cannot write the complex programs using these command line arguments. Very simple programs you can give. For example, if you want to find the factorial of a given number, yes, you can write. You can, if you want to find the check whether a given number is prime or not, or even or not, you can do such type of simple programs, right. So, that is all for today's session. In today's session, let me have a quick recap. In today's session, we have discussed the importance of the command line argument. What are these command line arguments we have discussed, and how many parameters or how many arguments it is going to take, this also we have discussed. And the two arguments are argument count and argument vector. Argument count gives the number of parameters or the arguments that is given in the command line, and argument vector is an array of strings which stores all the arguments from the command line in the form of strings. Argument vector of 0 always holds the name of the program, and from argument vector of 1 to argument vector of argc minus 1, everything will be taken as input to the command line argument. And the way you need to input the values will be the program name separated with white space, and the first parameter separated with white space, then you have second parameter, like that you have to follow. That means you need to give a white space between these arguments, but when you have a string that itself consists of spaces, you need to enclose it within double quotations or single quotations. And finally, we have seen some typecasting functions like a2f, a2i, a2l, I2a, L2a, which converts the strings to float, string to int, string to long, and so on. And by making use of these particular typecasting functions, we have seen an example on these command line arguments. And that is all the topic related to the command line arguments. Thank you one and all for joining the session.